Welcome to an update from North America. I'm Viki Forrest, the Trade and Investment Commissioner for Queensland here in North America. I have with me today Gabe Sulcus, who is the Business Development Manager for Trade and Investment Queensland, and Gabe heads up our trade efforts here in North America. So Gabe, good to have you with me.
Hi, Viki.
Also with me today is Chris Shipley. Chris has influenced and predicted the impact of technology on business and society for more than 30 years. And I've had the privilege of working with Chris for many of those years. Chris is also the author of The Adaptation Advantage. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
Hi, Viki. It's great to be here.
You'll hear more from Chris and Gabe shortly. Trade and Investment Queensland, North America, is located in San Francisco with a satellite office in New York. And TIQ promotes and supports investment between Queensland and North America. And COVID-19 has certainly thrown us some challenges these past few months. Reporting as of today out of Johns Hopkins shows the US has 2.3 million cases and over 120,000 deaths, and an economic challenge that has never been experienced in our lifetime. We've got a long way to go to recover from this pandemic, but we're already seeing some great examples of Queensland companies progressing their US market entry, and Gabe's going to talk more about that and how TIQ supports and promotes Queensland exporters here in the US. But even without a global pandemic to challenge us, the US is a very different and challenging market to what we're familiar with in Queensland. And it's not really about the difference between Queensland or Australia and what it's like in America. It's not a cultural difference that really is the biggest challenge. It's much more about the size of market. The small market, which Australia relatively speaking is, versus the very large market of the US. And the differences is what I call the DNA of each market. Differences in the speed of doing business, where in Queensland, the pace is much slower. The type of messaging you need to cut through in a massive market like the US, very, very different to what you'd be familiar with in your Queensland market. Sales models and techniques are different here. And even the communication style of Americans is very different to that of Queenslanders. But apart from those challenges of navigating the US market in normal times, what this crisis has shone a very bright light on, perhaps even more important than those market differences that we have to navigate, is the need for strong leadership. Something that each and every one of us has the opportunity and responsibility to take on, both at work and personally. And we'll hear much more about that from Chris later in the program. But now, here's Gabe Sulcus to talk about the opportunities for Queensland companies to grow their business in the US.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Viki. My name is Gabe Sulcus, and I'm very privileged to be the Business Development Manager, focused very squarely on trade opportunities in the North American market. These are very, very surreal times, but really it's been a privilege and a great opportunity to help Queensland companies keep their momentum going, accessing this market, and continuing to chase business during these challenging times. So the first point I really want to make in this presentation is that we are very results driven in the trade work we do. We are a government agency, but we're very commercially driven, and our KPIs are directly attached to the KPIs that our companies are chasing overseas. So we make it a priority to focus on Queensland clients that have demonstrated export readiness globally, and then specifically market readiness in the North American market. I'll talk a little bit more about how that diagnostic process goes in a minute. But just to emphasize that our role is very squarely in the execution of company goals category. So my focus and the team's focus is about making introductions, connecting clients to actual tangible business results in this market. We do that in an industry agnostic way that very much reflects the wide range and breadth and depth of Queensland capabilities. And I'll talk a little bit about how, given that we're focused on a very large market and a lot of capability from Queensland, how we serve that through a partner-driven approach. So briefly, we'll speak about that export and market readiness process. So if you're a Queensland company that is looking to engage in the North American market, the first step is to connect to TIQ staff in Queensland. These staff are best equipped to do a complete kind of 360-degree audit, understanding of your company, your business, and your global aspirations. It's a really important step of the process because we have 12 commissioners around the world, and TIQ support extends beyond just North America. So that relationship starts in Queensland, and that account owner there will be your guide through different export activities. So that contact will assess readiness, as I said, looking at export readiness, the capacity to deliver your product overseas, and then market readiness. And this is a questionnaire that's very specifically focused on have you done your competitor analysis? Are your materials put into North American parlance? Are you ready to transact and hit the ground running in this market? After that process is completed, you're introduced to Viki Forrest, our commissioner, and Viki will do a final check before generally assigning it to me to do more detailed work. I'll speak briefly then about how that work commences. It's very systematic. It's very bespoke, and that's really our mission when we're dealing with deeply market-ready companies. It's providing those tailored services. So I do a deep company assessment that builds on the work that my colleagues in Queensland do, truly understanding your corporate vision, your game plan, understanding your company materials. And that's part of the services we provide, reviewing those materials, pitch decks, documentation, ensuring you're ready for this market. Then going through a planning phase. This is not a one-touch effort. We'll set up a frequency of meetings with you, going through and defining very specific milestones and actionable intros and support we can provide while you're still in Queensland. We've seen in COVID-19 that obviously it's extended that time in Queensland specifically, but independent of this pandemic, there's so much that can be done so that when you hit that final stage of travel and execution, your materials, your strategic vision, your target lists are all in place. And that's where we execute. How we execute and how we deliver our services is through the partner network that I alluded to earlier. This is a bit of a dizzying logo splash here, and I could create multiple slides on top of this with more logos demonstrating the relationships that we have. What I'll say is I spend a significant amount of my time developing relationships with organizations that have both the sector and geographic expertise and focus to serve your needs in the North American market. We'll call out a few examples on this slide. One would be accelerator and incubator programs, Berkeley Skydeck, Acceleprise, Alchemist Accelerator, many other examples. These are programs that are generally programmatic in nature, cohort in nature, and usually provide some funding and lead to a demo day. They're a great opportunity to access strong networks in this country, initial capital, and then avenues to future capital. Our relationship is such that we can provide usually warm intros and fast-tracked access to contacts there to help you expedite your journey. Another category would be corporate innovation labs and public sector outfits that are scouting for new tech. It's a great way to sell your innovation through these labs that have defined very clear challenge areas, whether it's dealing with water supply issues and water equality like WaterStart, or Plug and Play that has a family of corporates across a variety of verticals. Again, we do warm intros that help you succeed in those contexts and sell your innovation. Economic development agencies would be a third example. Here I include Denver and some Houston organizations. There are many more examples. Outside of some of the top cities people would go to, like Silicon Valley, you see some of these other markets that are really going to roll out the red carpet, provide tailored business development support to win your business and to support you as a Queensland company to establish ultimately in that area. So cities like Denver will do a lot more than helping you just find office space. They'll actually help you win customers, win deals. So we'll make those sorts of intros. Industry associations would be the last one I would flag. Include a few here in the life sciences category: Biocom, CLSI, MassBio. By providing intros to these sorts of industry associations, you can meet your peers overseas, you can meet your customers, investors, and really be on a global stage very rapidly through those associations. And then outside of this partner network, of course, we make intros to individual investors, to individual customers, and to service providers who can help you translate your business overseas. I'm just going to flag two programs that we have historically run out of TIQ and have been great for Queensland companies that are looking to export. The Export Market Engagement Program, which is been a structured offering where companies receive some grant funding to support their export activities, meeting with customers and scouting the market. We're working with 8 companies right now through that program. And it's a really good model that formalizes the structure I spoke about earlier in terms of our work. And the Go Global Export Program, which is very much designed for exporters that need some funding from government to get a deal over the line. So it's a very specialized program. It's something we hope to see go in the future, but it's for exporters that have a customer in their back pocket, close to securing a deal. This funding will help you get over the line and clear impediments. But I'll say, independent of those two programs, go to the website, tiq.qld.gov.au. That's your best contact point into the organization. And the journey starts there and leads to us, where we'll help you achieve your export goals. So with that, I will turn it back over to Viki.
Thank you, Gabe. Great coverage of our trade service. Chris, in the Adaptation Advantage, you cover so many things relevant to the future of work that now, in a post-COVID-19 world, are looming so much larger for each one of us. Leadership, I think, is something we all need to take a much closer look at. So over to you, Chris, to take us through your thinking on this.
Well, thank you, Viki. And you are exactly right. The circumstances of today really do call out for strong leadership. And that's what I'd like to spend some time talking with you all about today. But let me set a little bit of context to make the case for strong leadership and the leadership model that I want to share with you. When Heather McGowan and I set out to write the Adaptation Advantage, the future of work was on some far-off horizon. We believed that rapid change, driven largely by technological innovation, demanded a new framework for professional identity, for learning of new skills and development, and for organizational purpose and leadership. It was also clear to us that as quickly as technology was disrupting how we work, social and cultural norms were changing just as fast to disrupt who are our notions of who we think we are. So that leaves most workers facing a twofold identity crisis. What do you do, and who are you? And that would be certainly a big enough challenge for anyone to sort out, but then along comes the novel coronavirus. And overnight, businesses hustled to become digital, workplaces where possible became distributed and virtual, and the future of work now was not so far off. And then, just as leaders started to get their arms around what it meant to work in a pandemic, America finally began to face a long overdue racial reckoning. And that is challenging business leaders to rethink so much about their employees, their customers, their products, and their histories. In other words, it's more important than ever that we talk about leadership. So in the time we have together today, I'd like to offer some guidance that I hope will help all of us become better leaders now and in the future of work. There are two intersecting vectors, I think, that explain what we're experiencing today: uncertainty and leadership. Now, when we know what we're doing, what we can expect, what we need to do next, in short, when we are certain about our environment, we can work through weak leadership. It's not an ideal situation, but certainly it's doable. Uncertain times can be made manageable with strong leadership, a firm guiding hand that calms and comforts people, that helps us navigate our organizations to some presumably safer place, even if we're not exactly sure where that place is. Again, it's not great, but it's doable. Uncertain times and weak leadership, on the other hand, are a dangerous combination. And we know that we don't know what's happening and we don't know what to do about it. And that becomes toxic in organizations, and certainly in many pockets around the world, we're seeing some of that today. What we want to aspire to, the place that we know we'll all thrive, is that intersection of certainty and sure leadership. Now, I want to be absolutely clear, because your leadership in the context of uncertainty really does define you as a leader. The best leaders will work well regardless of context. A smart leader in uncertain times is a quick problem solver. They're good at identifying issues and bringing clarity to a team and setting the team off to achieve realistic goals. Now, that same leader in certain times can be visionary, finding the next opportunity, defining a horizon before it even becomes visible to others, inspiring a team to perform beyond even their own beliefs and capabilities. Weak leaders, though, even in the best of times, when everything is certain, are little more than custodial figures who are just marking time for themselves and their organization. And worse, when times are uncertain, those weak leaders can be a real cancer to the organization. Now, I'm reminded of Seth Godin's comments when he said, "Managers manage products and leaders manage change." What's important to remember now is that everything is uncertain and everything is change. We're now, and we will continue to be, in uncertain times because the pace of change is coming at us so quickly that we can barely absorb it. So think about past sea changes. Advances in technology were once absorbed across generations. We had time to accommodate and to adapt to the disruptive innovations because they happen much less frequently. While technological and economic productivity were making great advances, we had the luxury of adapting to those implications over decades and even generations. I mean, I just think about my own career. I began working when the first PCs were coming to market. There was no public internet. A mobile device was a pad of paper and a pen, and social media was the group of people who gathered around the coffee pot in the break room. Each of the technologies that accelerated economic breakthroughs transformed our business and culture, and that's at least 4 significant changes in my professional career. So at the current rate of change, a college student graduating today and entering the workforce can expect to undergo dozens of substantial technological disruptions before they hit middle age. But we're not going to continue at the current rate of change. Technology is moving at an exponential pace, and the coronavirus has been a remarkable accelerator in our workplaces and in our culture. In fewer than 120 days, which is about as long as most of us have been under some form of mandated shelter in place, the future of work moved from some far-off place to something that's happening right now. Overnight, workforces became distributed. Companies shared work across regions and time zones. Work from home, which was once unimaginable to many companies and to many leaders, has become the new standard. Automation that puts low-risk robots in place of highly vulnerable people start to seem like a really good idea. And these are just a few of the transformations that we're seeing now and are sitting just over the horizon. So when you combine the exponential pace of change and the accelerant of COVID-19, you'll quickly realize that the slowest pace of change you will ever experience in your lifetime is right now. The real question then is, how are we to lead? How do we lead ourselves and our organizations? How do we lead in our communities? And how do we do that when we ourselves are uncertain? It's times like these, and face it, it's always going to be times like these going forward, that we need to build our teams and our leadership on 5 pillars of certainty. Each of these could be a webinar in their own right, so forgive me for kind of sprinting through them, but I want to just give you 5 ideas of things that you can do as a leader now to make a difference in your organizations. The first is to think about purpose. Ever since Simon Sinek asked us to start with why, we've talked about a purpose-forward organization. In short, what you do will barely register if you don't understand why you do it. If you want to be really good, you must ask, as Sinek says, why? Start with why. That idea, though it doesn't really go far enough in a world where everything is changing, so you really need to understand and focus on purpose. Purpose, it turns out, isn't simply an objective. It's the engine that drives everything in the company. When the half-life of a product is months rather than years, purpose drives new products and services that replace the old ones. When skill requirements shift even before you can fill the gap and hire new personnel, purpose connects the company to passionate and curious people ready to adapt and learn. Purpose shifts our focus to future potential rather than past performance. And perhaps most importantly, when teams are distributed, purpose drives decision-making. If you understand your purpose, you understand how to make the right decisions for the organization. Leading a truly purpose-centric organization creates an opportunity and a challenge for leaders. Purpose-centric companies don't require the command and control structure that still dominate many organizations. These complicated hierarchies assumed that the leader had all the answers, had much of the expertise, and all the decision-making authority. We're now moving to complex organizations. These purpose-centric organizations work differently. Their shared vision and values drive activity. Value is created as knowledge flows through complex networks of contributors. There is no isolated or insulated silo of expertise. Decision-making is distributed. In many ways, these complex, hyper-connected networks should be a relief for leaders who, in hierarchies, were often the single point of success or failure in the organization. Yet these complex organizations require a relentless focus on purpose and a deep ability to nurture rather than to order teams to succeed. Nurturing begins with vulnerability. Strong leaders, especially leaders in uncertain times, need to get very comfortable with being very uncomfortable. You'll recognize that you cannot know it all because your organization now is in the business of learning and creating new knowledge. You can't know what hasn't yet been created. You freely acknowledge what you don't know. You admit when you are wrong, and you frame it as an opportunity to learn and to build expertise and capacity in your organization. Ironically, not knowing and the ability to learn from it is the new expertise. Now, I have failed enough times and at enough things to know that failure is always an option. It may not be desirable and it rarely feels good, but it is always a possibility. Leaders who decry failure prevent their teams from learning. If failure is not an option, then admitting failure is an impossibility. If your team can't come to you and acknowledge a failure, you have cheated them, your organization, and you out of an opportunity to learn and to get better. Instead, consider a eulogy for a bad idea or a project gone wrong, an accident or a mistake. Make a ceremony of failures. What happened? What might have gone better? What might have gone worse? What might we do differently in the future? How do we avoid making the same mistake again? That's not failure. That is learning. We hear a lot of talk today about diversity, and I think this is really a critical point in your organization and in your leadership. Creating that safe space for learning is critical to effective teams, and diversity is the other critical element. Yes, of course, diversity of race and religion and gender, but also diversity of experience and expertise, of education, of socioeconomic strata, and especially diversity of thought. Your diversity and inclusion efforts are only beginning once you've ticked the boxes of identity. Your best and most productive teams are those working in psychological safety, learning with and from one another, recognizing the tremendous value of shared learning over common experience. Which is to say that if you want to be well prepared to lead the organization of the past of work, organize and manage around a narrow set of attributes. But if you want to thrive in the future of work, nurture and lead among a broad range of diverse and trusting colleagues. We urgently need compassionate, vulnerable, empathic, authentic, decisive moral leadership. And I'm inviting each of us to fill the leadership vacuum created by our uncertain times. If we're to navigate accelerating change, if we're to adapt to meet to new opportunities, we need to become very certain leaders, and we need to do it now. I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you today, and Viki and Gabe, thank you for inviting me to be part of this webinar, and I hope that all of you will find your adaptation advantage and thrive in the future of your work.
Thank you, Chris. It's inspiring and so valuable for all of us to think deeply about how we all can be better leaders. A huge thank you to you and Gabe for sharing your time with our Queensland audience today. And to our audience, I hope you enjoyed our presentations, have learned a little more about doing business in North America, and please reach out to Trade and Investment Queensland to find out more about our services. And now it's goodbye from San Francisco.